All right, so welcome back. I want to talk a couple of minutes about why projects have so many problems. Just about every project encounters one challenge or another, and the result is that there are problems, it's late, somebody's complaining about something, and the schedules go out the window. So let's look at some of the current research. There's a book that was written by a couple of fellows by the name of Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister, very well-known industry experts. And they've come up with a number of things that are problems that are common to projects across the country. For example, schedule flaws. Somebody makes a mistake in the actual scheduling, the project management scheduling. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with business systems analysis, so we're not going to talk about that. The third item on their list is staff turnover. When key people in the project all of a sudden decide that the grass is greener across the street and they up and leave. They don't even ask the rest of the team if it's okay. And away they go, and they take the knowledge with them that is so instrumental to success on the project. We've all encountered this kind of thing before. And underperformance by team members is another issue that many projects encounter. When you know all those projects when you're ready to soar with eagles, but you have to work with turkeys. So these kind of things happen on a fairly regular basis. None of these have anything to do with analysis as such, although that's why projects are challenged. So we're not going to talk about these things. We're instead going to talk about a couple of other things that were on their list. For example, second on their list was scope creep. Things that show up that weren't uncovered in the requirements analysis. Things that show up out of the never the what, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, that's part of the scope. And somebody else says, well, we haven't budgeted for that. We don't have the time. We finished that part, but it's there. Now the issue really is, it's not scope creep. The real issue is we didn't ask the questions to be able to get the requirements up front before we either acquired or we built the system. So we have to deal with that. And that's one of the issues we're going to deal with as we go through this course. The other one is, of course, specification breakdowns. Things that end up being, good people are trying to do good work, but they end up with a spec that's vague, it's unclear, we're not really sure how complete it is. And yet we know that the requirement has to be clear and concise and unambiguous. It has to be in business terms and it has to be brief. Those are the things we're looking for. But quite often, it's not what we end up with for some strange reason. So how do we change that? Well, that's what this is all about. We're going to look at how do we change these kind of issues? How do we eliminate as much as possible this issue of scope creep or requirements inflation, to put it nicely? How do we make sure that the specification, the business requirements document, is actually the opposite of what it says here? That's clear and concise, not ambiguous, and deals with everything it's supposed to deal with. That's what we're going to deal with on this course. So, let me go back here. One of the issues also is that conventional analysis methods, as good as they are, have challenges to deal with. And everybody knows this. Everybody who's been in the business knows that clients and their expectations are difficult to manage. Now, is that a function of the analysis or the analyst for that matter? But the fact is, clients and their expectations are hard to manage. We also know that analysts typically have to have a lot more time to become thoroughly knowledgeable about the client's business. We also know that no matter how hard we try, no matter how well we do the work, no matter how many people we take to lunch, we still have the challenge of that they're still disappointed sometimes with the results that they get. Because they sometimes expect us, they expect the analyst to figure out their requirements by asking some questions and to figure out the solution to boot. And when we don't do that in the time frame that perhaps they think we should, then they get a little bit disappointed. And finally, of course, we all know this one, it just takes too long. And nobody is ever happy with it. And that's why even today, we still have project managers or managers saying, let's just stop with this analysis stuff. We're done with it. We've spent our 3 months on it. We've blown the budget on it. Let's just move on and do some real work. Imagine now if you're building a house, and let's imagine that you can't imagine doing this, of course, but you went to the architects and said, look, forget about this architecture, just call in the plumbers and the carpenters and electricians, the masons, and start building the thing. We don't need the architecture, we'll figure it out as we go along. Well, you'd never do that, would you? It would never happen. You're not going to build a house that's worth perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars and say, let's forget about that essential front end that stipulates the architecture, that first of all addresses your needs in the house and how we're going to hang it together. You wouldn't do that. So why would we do that when it comes to building or acquisition of systems? We have systems that are worth, in many cases, millions and millions of dollars. And the cost of running those systems year after year can run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And yet, to this very day, there are still managers who say, let's get over this front end piece as quickly as possible and get on with the real work. Now, they're well-meaning. The reason they say this is because analysis has a reputation of being abstract, fuzzy, not so clear. Get a lot of stuff that's produced, but we're not so sure how well we can work with it. We're going to change all of that. So we're going to change that with this approach to analysis. And we're going to do that in the next little while on this course. So the advantages of this approach would be to solve all those problems that we talked about just a minute ago. The key advantage is that this approach that we're going to talk about for the next little while is that it enables effective transfer of knowledge from the subject matter expert to the business analyst. It helps us to identify things that they may not even mention. It helps us to find those things that the analyst doesn't ask about directly, and the subject matter expert or the client doesn't say, hey, I need this. So how do we find stuff that they don't mention? Well, we're going to find out in a little while. And of course, it facilitates client buy-in. The reason it facilitates client buy-in is because it's their stuff. We have to ask them about their requirements, not our interpretation of how the business should run, not our own good ideas, but their ideas about the business. I know one thing for sure, because I can hear somebody saying, quietly in their own mind, of course, somewhere, I can hear somebody saying, yeah, but my clients don't know what they want. We've all heard that, haven't we? My clients don't know what they want. My experience is that clients do know what they want. They just don't articulate it in such a way that the rest of us can understand what they want. They have a pretty good idea. There's another aspect of this, and that is that they know what they want at a high level. When it gets into some of the details, they're learning about what they want as we ask the questions and go along. So the last question in the world we should be asking somebody is, and you've all heard this question, turning around to the client and say, so, tell me, what would you like to have in your system? And it's the last thing in the world we should be asking. Tell me, what would you like to have? It's not a restaurant, where you order off the menu, right? Notice what happens. If I'm the analyst, and if I approach you as a client, and let's say you're paying me either a salary or as a consultant, you're paying me money, one way or the other, to do the analysis. And then I come up to you and I say, so, tell me, what would you like to have in your system? Notice what I've done. This is really, really cool, especially if I'm a consultant, of course. What I've done all of a sudden is I've transferred the responsibility for figuring out the requirements from me, who gets paid for it, to you. Isn't that neat? And at the end of the day, I'm going to get paid for it. And then, if there's a problem with what I keep track of, what you told me, I'm going to say, well, you didn't tell me that. Now, nobody does this intentionally, of course, right? So I'm making a little bit of fun of it. Nobody does it intentionally. But that question is asked all the time. What would you like to have in your system? You can't ask that question. I'm going to show you how to eliminate that question. Also, you should never ask why for anything. The common wisdom is always find out why. You can't ask why. Why is a 4-letter word? Well, 4 characters. Right? So we're going to ask different kinds of questions instead. Excuse me. It says here, it facilitates client buy-in. The process we're going to go through. Why does it facilitate client buy-in? Because we get the information from the client by asking very specific questions in a very, very precise manner. They're going to tell you about their desired business policies. And one of the fundamental truths is that most people do not disagree with themselves. So client buy-in comes from their stuff. They're not going to disagree with their stuff as they go along. Excuse me. We're also going to spend a lot less time than is traditionally done in figuring out the requirements. We're going to end up with requirements that are in plain language, clear, concise, unambiguous, and brief, rather than the Victorian novel, the 850-pound specification, brief. Now, from the technical side, now I know that those of you who are analysts, business analysts, are not from the technical side. All you have to do is just turn off the sound for a minute. But from the technical side, we're also going to produce a normalized data set to about third normal form, more or less. Okay? From a business analysis perspective, you don't care. But you're still going to do it without even knowing you're doing it. But I'm going to show you how to do it in about 10 minutes, a little bit later on. And you're never going to talk about data. You're never going to talk about normalization, cardinality, or reverse cardinality, or inheritance, or any of those other nice things with the clients. You know why we're not going to talk about that with the clients? Because that's like an alien language to them. Imagine if you went out to the bus stop, there are 10 people there, and said to them, explain normalization to me. They'll say, well, you mean it's like something that's not abnormal? You know, that kind of thing, right? So you can't use language that is not mainstream language or the language of the client, the business they're in. We're going to take a single iteration approach to this analysis most of the time. We're going to apply the 80-20 rule. Now, single iteration means that we're going to go through something, a requirement, once. We're not going to be doing this archaeological dig that's so common, whereas you uncover a little bit, and then you spend more time with them, and then you uncover a little bit more, and then you find out there's more, there's a civilization in there. Okay? Because this is business analysis, business systems analysis, it's not programming, nor is it database design. So we're going to be able to look at it once, get the important information right away, except in very few cases. And you'll know when you need more information as an analyst, because we take a non-technical view of something that has to be used by technical people a little bit later on. But we must take a non-technical view because that's the way our client will see it. And that's the language we speak with them as well. Now the other question is, we've talked about business systems analysis. And some people have asked me, well, can we only do this for business systems? And the answer is no, it doesn't have to be a business system. It can be anything that requires analysis. Here's a list you can look at, and you can see that it covers pretty well the entire spectrum of different forms of analysis that you could be assigned to do, including GIS projects. You can do gap analysis, feasibility studies. You can do data warehouse projects. We're going to talk about some of this as we go along. So is it only for business systems? No, not at all. It's for any kind of a system. And what's a system? A system is a set of procedures that you put together. Now, the fact is today that the vast majority of systems are being automated. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time figuring out what's the non-automated part versus the automated part. We spend a little bit of time on that, but not as business analysts. The software engineering team, the programmers, the designers, the database designers, they're the ones who have to figure out the interfaces of things that make it run. Because we're not going to talk about things that make it run. We're going to talk about what are the requirements. Someone else is going to figure out the things that make it work, the things that are necessary to deliver the requirement.